Welcome to the NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast Show. Here are your hosts, Jeff Carrier and Seth Lull.
And welcome back, everyone, to the NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast Show. I am your host, Jeff Carey. He is Seth Lull, and we are back for another great episode talking fantasy football. Be sure to hit us up online at NFL Talking Heads, all social media outlets, NFLTalkingHeads.com. Now, in this episode, we're going to be breaking down some players that Seth and I are just undecided about. And we're kind of lukewarm / they're 5 on our like scale. We don't think we hate them. We're not sure we love them. We can be swayed in either direction. So every year we talk a lot about players to target that we like, maybe we don't like. In this part of the season, though, being in June, we're still undecided about a lot of players. We got to figure that part out. So we want to talk about those players openly. Before we get there, Seth, our opening question of the episode is, which I think is going to stay consistent. It's early on ADPs, but is Travis Kelce a first-round pick?
That's a great question. I mean, my philosophy has never been to reach or draft or a core. I'm never one of the guys in the league that's drafting the first or second tight end. And obviously, there's a big drop off in tight end. There has been for a while now. So I'm usually in that just wait till the end, grab somebody off the trash heaps, maybe grab a couple, get a couple bites at the apple. This is a year when I see, me personally, I don't see a scenario in which I take Travis Kelce in the first round. But if somebody else was to take Travis Kelce in the first round, I don't think it's not smart, because I think at the back end of the first, you have Kelce, you have Tyreek Hill, you have potentially Nick Chubb lingering. You have am I missing anybody? They'll go in that range. Maybe you reach on Cam Akers. Someone could do that. But I think Travis Kelce, if he has a season like he had last year, if you knew he was going to have that type of season this year, I think it's not a bad pick. Just me personally, number one, I never take running back tight ends that early. Number two, do you really want to try and grab Kelce the year after he had his best year as a pro? I mean, 2018 was close. But last year, 105 catches, 1,400 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. I guess my roundabout answer is probably no. I wouldn't take him, but I could certainly see the case for taking him. And if somebody else took him, I could totally understand it. Especially, the one caveat too is, especially depending on your roster construction. If you're in a league with shallower rosters, when you can only start 2 wide receivers, maybe only 1 flex. Tight ends become that much more valuable. In that case, yes. But a lot of the leagues that you and I are in, they're much deeper. We're starting multiple flex. We're starting 3 wide receivers in most cases. In those cases, it's really hard for me to justify, breaking the bank on a tight end. I will say, though, last thing I'll say is, you look at his numbers last year, they look like wide receiver numbers, like really good wide receiver numbers that you're getting from the tight end position.
Yeah, and he has been very consistent. So even though last year was a little bit of an elevated season for him, not much has changed in terms of his year-over-year production, personnel changes, etc. So you would definitely expect him to be in that range of, it looks like, fantasy
80 catches, 1,000 yards, and then
yeah, so
anywhere from 5 to 10 touchdowns.
Fantasy Pros has him at 312 points last year. Second was Darren Waller at 278. So there's about a 30-point difference there in points. 30 points difference. Now, what I would like to see is, when I do my projections, I always like to look at the value-based scoring, because one of the things that's kind of always a little bit unique with these tight ends that go in the first round or super high, back when Gronkowski was getting this kind of draft capital, was that the second tight end never got the same allocation. Like, Darren Waller is 30 points behind Kelce, and you have to take him arguably in front of Tyreek Hill, whereas Darren Waller is going 2.11 a full round later. Like I don't understand what the mix match there. Like one of those two has to be not correctly valued. Darren Waller needs to be a lot closer to Travis Kelce, or Travis Kelce needs to be a lot closer to Darren Waller. And so I'm very much inclined to go with Travis Kelce needs to be a lot closer to Darren Waller. I will say I had Darren Waller in every single league last year, luckily, and having that tight end, that constant tight end that can outscore wide receivers is amazing. You know, it's awesome for roster construction. So I think if we had to put an answer to this, to your point, if you're in a shallow league that only has 2 wide receivers, maybe only 1 flex, and there's just too many wide receivers, then yeah, Travis Kelce should probably be drafted there, and he likely will be. And if you're playing in the types of leagues that we're playing in with, double QB, multiple wide receivers, multiple flex, where you're starting almost upwards of 5-6 wide receivers, I don't think it's worth it. And that's why it's important to look at the value-based draft points, because that will show you what the replacement level scoring is in your league versus just looking at total points. So anything to add to that?
No, I think it's a question that, he's been really good for the past few years, so I think he's inching into that conversation where, like, is he worth a first-round pick? Especially if you're a player like me that's been burned by tight ends multiple years. So, like, I think it's something that I really need to think more about, because reflexively, I'm always like, yeah, I can't take a tight end in the first round. But I think Travis Kelce's production is just getting to the point where it's something that I would have to consider. I don't know if I pull the trigger and do it, but I think it definitely warrants a serious consideration, especially for shallow leagues at the back end.
And what are your thoughts on my, does Travis Kelce deserve that extra bump away from Darren Waller? Or at this point, with Darren Waller having multiple good seasons and really coming into his own, why is there such a wide gap? Do you feel like my analysis there is do I have a point there, or what are your thoughts on that separation between Kelce and Darren Waller?
Where's Waller going again? Like end of the second, third round?
2.11 versus 1.09. And I anticipate this staying relatively similar, where Travis Kelce is going to go considerably higher.
Yeah, I would rather have Waller at that price point, than have to spend a first round pick on Kelce. But you know how it is when you get into that area of the draft where Waller's going. It's just, what are the chances that you could try and be cute and say, I'm just going to go get Waller? It doesn't always work out that way. I think they're very close. The one thing you can say about Kelce is he's just been doing it for longer, and he's in the Chiefs' offense, which those two combinations, the combination of those two factors are what lead to him. You have to pay a premium on him, and he is better. And albeit slightly better in every category. Besides maybe catches, I know Waller is, I think at this point it's safe to say he's just as good or dependable in for PPR leagues for receptions, because he's a target machine, and the Raiders really don't have anybody else to throw the ball to, and they lose Nelson Aguilar. So,
all right, let's get into the episode. Players were undecided about. How else would you describe this? Since I kind of opened up.
Well, so there's plenty of players at this point, and we're two months away from drafting people. But there are plenty of players that I'm just locked in on. That we'll spend time talking about between now and the beginning of the season, like Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, obviously you, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Amari Cooper. We know the guys you love. Like, we have strong opinions on these players, and there are players that I really dislike, that I'm completely out on. One example is like Cam Akers, and there are others. But there is like those in between players where I don't hate them, I don't love them, and I want some of them. I wonder, am I missing something? Why are they going so high? Like, I'm not against it, but I need to really form more of an opinion on them. These are also players like I'm imagining like me not having a ton of shares of, because there's probably going to be a player in each league that I'm in that's going to feel more strongly about them than me. So they would have to fall to the right spot for me to get them. And we're still early. We don't know what that spot should be. So there are players that I'm keeping an open mind. I can see the upside. I can see the case for them, but I can also see the case against them. And which is why, we're going to hash some of this out today. I know we have a couple you have a couple players on your list that also appear on my list. So maybe we go into those players first.
Yeah, let's cover those players first. So we're both undecided about these first two players. So maybe we'll have a little bit better of an opinion when we're going over the players that didn't make both of our lists. First one up is Antonio Gibson. He's a player that, I'll just kind of kick it off, that is going at a fairly rich premium like most running backs are. He had a productive rookie season. He missed 2 games and looks like pretty much missed a third because the game against Pittsburgh, he had 2 carries and no targets. He, coming out of college, was kind of dubbed not an every down back, but he is 6'2", 221. So, that might surprise a lot of people if you haven't really looked up his size. He had 170 carries. He had games where he had, 6 carries, 13 carries, and he also had 3 games with 19 or 20 carries as well. So, and he obviously catches the ball a good bit. He had 36 catches, not, groundbreaking or anything, but, he's one of those players that you want to make sure that you have the right analysis on, right? Which is a little bit of what you just mentioned and talked about, because people might have more stronger feelings on, and especially at the running back level, you can't afford to be, I don't know if he can produce again. I don't know if he could take the next step. You're talking about a much cheaper running back than these first rounders. Where do we go with him? So we're both in agreement. We're really undecided about Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, and with me, it's like, and like all these players on my list aren't like created equal. Some of them I'm erring more towards the side of like, I think I don't like him. I'm not sure. I think Gibson's more on the other direction with me, where I think overall I like him and I can be sold on him. I'm just not 100% sure that, like, if I was picking 2.04, that I could take him, just given the small sample size, given, he was taken in the 3rd round in the NFL draft. He wasn't really pegged to be like this world beater, to be one of the top running backs in fantasy. It was kind of a surprise, unless I'm mistaken there. So it was kind of a surprising player. He had a couple monster games. He had the game in Dallas, where he had 128 yards and a touchdown. So he had that massive game. He had a couple really big games, and then he was solid, in a lot of the other games too. Overall, the numbers, when you look at him, like under 40 catches, under 1,000 yards, didn't have the greatest year statistically, but he was a rookie. The offense figures to get a little bit better. So, like, I can see the case for him. With me, I just don't know. It just becomes a situation where, do I want to spend a top 15 pick on Antonio Gibson when there are players that I love right around, like you guys, Calvin Ridley in that range going after him. There's DK Metcalf going after him. You also have CEH.
That makes a tough part. Well, okay, so you're about to get to a running back. I was going to say, that's always a tough part, is trying to compare him to the wide receiver in the same spot.
Exactly, because the receivers are always going to look sexier at that point, and that's what I always run into. And you gotta balance it out. Like, obviously, you need, especially if you don't get a running back in the 1st round, you need a running back. So I can definitely see the value in Gibson. It's hard with a running back like him with a small sample size on what's probably going to be a below average offense again. Can he repeat that? We just have it. It's the same thing with Cam Akers. We haven't seen him do it enough, and he could argue he was definitely more productive than Cam Akers last year, and he's going behind him. So you're going to have to pay a premium for a player like this. It's just, do I want to guess right, or there is risk involved.
Yeah, he finished as the 13th running back. It seems like a little bit of his upside is built in. A little. I wouldn't say like fully, because if he put together a magical season, then clearly he could easily surpass a top 15 draft capital pick. I mean, it wouldn't be that tremendously difficult if he stayed healthy, and he could be in a situation, an offense, where maybe outside of just coming out of college and his physical skill set, he's just more of a fantasy producer. He's utilized a lot. He's catching the ball a decent amount. They have no other people to give the ball to, right? The other running backs on the team are J.D. McKissick, who is much more of a 3rd down type of back, and and also always unhealthy. And then you have the Peyton Barber of the world who can't run or catch, so he's not a threat in either category. And then Lamar Miller, does Lamar Miller even make the team at this point? But so there's really no one else there. And when you're looking for running backs that are at least getting to touch the ball, he fits that category, but his offense is worrisome too at the same time, right? So
yeah. Overall, a scale of 1 to 10, like if we have a 5, we're completely up in the air about it. I think I'd put him at maybe a 6. Like I've been warming up. The more looking into Antonio Gibson, I've been warming up to him, but he's a player where I just feel like there are a lot of people that are going to be a lot more adamant about his prospects than me, where I'm still going to be a little bit wishy-washy, at least as of right now, end of June. So that's why he's on the list for me.
I think with that high of capital that's going to have to be assigned to him, I'm going to go with the straight 5. But let's move to the next player. Got quite a few to go through here. Next is Joe Mixon, which I wonder if when people they're going to be surprised because they're going to hear of a running back who's been around for a little bit on an offense that we like, right? On an offense that we like, and going in the second round. So some people might say, well, why doesn't he fit some kind of give me the points kind of methodology? And I think that could be potentially a fair statement. So with Joe Mixon, just like him going the second round last year, which looked like value, but it just didn't pass the sniff test for me. And this year, to me, I mean, he's going to be the guy. He played 6 games last year. Okay, in those 6 games, which is basically all the games that Joe Burrow was there, of course, he only passed 60 yards one time, or 2 times, should I say, 2 times, and then 1 time above 69 yards. And he only had one 100-yard game. So he doesn't seem to be running the same as well. He caught okay amount of balls. He caught 3 per game. 2 of them had 6-catch games. Again, I don't know if he's the same running back that we hoped he was, and I don't know if as many carries are going to be there for him.
He had a really bad rookie season. There's a high expectations. I know he was going top 5 in all the dynasty drafts. There was massive expectations for him to come in and be this. A lot of people thought he was the most talented running back in that rookie class, and it just has never materialized. Right, it just hasn't happened for whatever reason. It hasn't clicked, and he does a lot of things okay, but he doesn't do anything great. He's not like he had 2 years over 1,000 yards. He's never been a guy to get 10 touchdowns or even close. He had 1 year with 8. He's never been a guy to catch a lot of passes. He had 1 year with 55 catches. Every other year was 45. So he's not getting a lot of catches. He's not going to get you a lot of touchdowns. He's not very explosive. So he checks a lot of the box. He's good in a lot of areas. He's not great in a lot of areas. So for that reason, I think that's why I would rather go in another direction. Usually. Yeah. But I want to keep it somewhat an open mind, and I will give him the fact, like you said, yes, like because he's solid in a lot of areas, he could fit the mold of a higher floor, give me the points, can't miss guy who's not going to completely let you down. But in the second round where you're going to be taking him, I just want there to be more upside, and we haven't seen that come to fruition from him yet. Yep.
And while he's played 14 games, 16 games, I mean, there's lots of games that he's started and not been able to play. He played only 6 last year, so he's coming off an injury. He ran for 3.6 yards per carry. I mean, nothing great. The team is changing around him. It's a passing team. I just feel like while he has a lot of those things, you mentioned that he's decent in a lot of areas, it just feels like we can replace that production somewhere. Like, where else can we replace that production? I feel like when we do our same player, different rounds, one of our trademarked episodes, I feel like there's going to be some kind of, Leonard Fournette, or someone's going to be a same player, different round with Joe Mixon. And the thing with running backs is every year you have to be real nimble and real aggressive early in free agency, because there's going to be these people that pop up out of nowhere, just like Philip Lindsay did a few years ago. Remind me who else popped up last year. James Robinson. I feel like if you were aggressive early and took a couple stabs later in the round, you might need to get a little bit of luck, but we can get this type of production replaced because, like you said, the upside just isn't really there. And there's still enough downside too. That's the thing. He's not a can't miss player because of injuries and other things.
Yep. So all right, so we both have Antonio Gibson and Joe Mixon on our list. Joe Mixon is kind of been this player for me for 2 or 3 years. Like I've never, like, just when I want to completely be out on him, I look at his numbers and can kind of talk myself into admitting, he's useful, especially, if you need a running back early and you miss on the other ones, he'll give you production. But okay, so here's where we part ways now, because we have 4 each on our list, all different. So let's blow through these. I'm going to start with my number one guy. That when we were thinking of this topic, the first guy that came to mind for me is Kenny Golladay. And so Kenny Golladay went to the Giants in the offseason. Fairly rare that you see a receiver this young and this good through his first 4 seasons change teams. I mean, maybe Brandon Cooks kind of fits that category too. I'm trying to think of another player like that.
Brandon Cooks was the first name that came to mind. When they didn't want to sign him, they spent the first rounder on him. I said, "Well, what are you guys doing?" And then, so go ahead and finish.
So on one hand, his ADP, like that, it's baked into his ADP. The fact that he's switching teams, and there's that unknown there. So I think the value at first glance is still pretty good. I mean, let's face it. This guy he got injured early through 5 games last year. He was on a tear. The previous 2 seasons, over 1,000 yards. Really showed a lot of promise. But he was in an offense in Detroit where they had Marvin Jones and like really nobody else. They weren't throwing the ball to any running backs. There was no tight end. This was before T.J. Hawkinson really came into form. And say what you want on Matt Stafford, he's been somewhat underachieving at points in his career. He hasn't been proven to be a winner, but if you were a wide receiver in a Matt Stafford offense, you're the number one receiver, they do okay. Calvin Johnson obviously was a beast. Kenny Golladay did really well. Like Matt Stafford can get the ball to his wide receivers, and he can sling the ball all around the field. So he goes to a Giants team now where they don't really have any great options, but they have a bunch of okay options. So you obviously have Evan Ingram, you have Sterling Shepard. You have Darius Slayton, you have Saquon Barkley, who will enter the season, presumably healthy. So there's just a lot of stuff there where I wonder, and we don't, like we talked about earlier, we don't really trust the offense. So on one hand, again, his talent, his production through 4 years has been really good. But he's going to the Giants, no Matt Stafford, changing teams, a lot of other stuff there that he has to contend with. I'm not out on Kenny Golladay because if he's going in the late 4th, early 5th, I think that's a fair price. But is it something I'm going to feel the need to move on at that point when there's going to be other good options at that point in the draft as well?
So you probably have him right around like your 5 on your scale of 1 to 10?
100%, yeah, right in the middle. I mean, like look at some of the players that are going after him as of right now. You got Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett. Those receivers. Those 2 receivers come to mind right away that are like I think right now I would rather have both of them than Golladay. Like after that though, you have Kyle Pitts and T.J. Hawkinson. If you need a tight end, like that might be a spot where you say, okay, like the upside of Pitts, T.J. Hawkinson, the upside there, especially with no Golladay, like maybe you go tight end there. There isn't a ton else that excites me, which is why like I'm open to the idea of maybe rostering Golladay in a couple leagues, but I think the jury's still out on him in terms of what he's going to do this year, at least in my mind.
I mean, not really for me. I'm a lot more convinced that I don't want to take the risk on Kenny Golladay. He has missed multiple games or missed games every year except for 1 season. They have the main thing with Kenny Golladay has to be the offense for me. The Giants ranked 26th last year in terms of pass attempts, and at least in Detroit, he was like the only guy to go to, like the only guy. And he did good with the target share percentage. That's going to most likely have to drop. They also pass a lot less than Detroit. They have a lot of other weapons, as you mentioned. I just don't know how he gets worked into the offense where it's going to ever excite me. Now, he has the talent where you say, well, maybe he goes anywhere and it's not going to matter. Like, he's going to command whatever percent. I can't buy it. I just can't buy it. If he was good enough, maybe Detroit would have kept him. I know they're trying to rebuild everything over there. I probably got to put him like to a 3, not like a completely like standoffish 1, just because of where he's going and his physical attributes. But I just have really zero interest in getting Kenny Golladay, and it has a lot to do with the fact that I also don't want anyone on the Giants. And so I do this a lot where I'm like, I just don't want anyone on this team. Like, I'm not going to lose my fantasy league because I don't have anyone on the Giants. Like, that's not going to be the case.
This is the classic example of, like, talent versus, like, situation. Like, if you're just looking at the situation, you're like, I'm out. Obviously, he's a really talented guy. Like, I loved Kenny Go, one of my favorite receivers, before when he was in Detroit, obviously. So it's like, do you just trust the talent and trust that wins out, or do you? Yeah. So I could see it either way. I mean, you're a little bit more on one side than I am. I'm open, but I'm leaning to, like, with Gibson, I was leaning more towards, like, I could see me rostering him. Galladay, I think I'm leaning more towards, I probably won't have any shares of him. But let's face it, we're in 5-6 fantasy leagues. Anything can happen. All right, who's your player?
My next guy, I know where you're going to be going on this. I think we're going to kind of flip roles here. I might have this guy like at a 6. These are all going to be very close to straddling the the uncertainty point, which is the whole topic of the podcast here. And this might surprise you as well. We haven't talked about him at all. It's Josh Jacobs. He sits there in this really awkward spot in the draft where he's going to go after so many different people. He's on a team where I'd like to look up what the runs per game is, because I think the Raiders were number 1. We know that deep down that's just what Gruden is. He still does a lot of running. He's a de facto number 1. One slight concern, as weird as this might sound, is like Kenyon Drake's coming over. He's a pretty comparable number 2, so I definitely don't want to underestimate that, and maybe that's factored into his ADP, but he finished as the number 8 running back last year. And I don't see what else has really changed to say that Josh Jacobs can't be utilized as a potentially back-end number 1 running back. So, again, he's close to like a number 6 for me. I'm kind of inclined and like, hey, if I swing and miss in these first 2 rounds on running backs, am I okay with Josh Jacobs being my number 1? And today I kind of feel like I could definitely be sold on that idea.
Yeah. Well, when you first said his name, I think I am more on, I'd probably be a 4. I mean, that might surprise you. I'm not a 2 or 3 because, like, yeah, they get Kenyon Drake, but let's face it, like, Kenyon Drake now, this is his 3rd team. So if Josh Jacobs is the guy, I can't imagine it's going to be a 50-50 split. He's going to tote the rock. He's going to get touchdowns. I mean, he's had 19 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons. So we know he's getting touchdowns. He's become a little bit better in the passing game. He was supposed to be like a decent pass catcher out of college, out of Alabama.
Yeah, that was
right?
that was like the more of the reason where Alabama used him, and then all of a sudden he gets to the NFL and they use him less there. It makes no sense. But
if he can get into the 40-50 catch range, if he can become more of a pass catcher in his 3rd season, I could see, especially when you consider players like we get it with running backs. You're like, this is a prime example in the 3rd round. It's not going to be sexy. There's going to be the Justin Jeffersons of the world, Michael Thomas of the world, Keenan Allen's. There's going to be more sexy options. But if you need a running back, you're getting him around later than Cam Akers. I mean, what's the difference between him and Cam Akers? And I feel like I'm going to be beating up on Cam Akers for a few months. But really, I mean, he's essentially the same player, unless we see something different from Cam Akers this year. I don't know. So, me personally, I probably won't have any shares of him, but I could see a scenario in which, like, I pull the trigger in a league where, let's say I have a late 1st round pick and I take Tyreek Hill, and then in the 2nd round I don't get a running back for whatever reason. I could see me taking Josh Jacobs if I'm entering the 3rd round and he's on the board, and I have no running backs in my team. I could see myself adding him to the roster as my number 1.
All right, yeah, a little bit higher. You had a 4. I would have expected you closer to the 2-3 range. Who's next on your list?
I got Jerry Jeudy. And I'm probably I'm on the lower end. I'm probably like 4-ish on him. The reason I even have him on the list is, I mean, so he's going. Let me just look up again, see if it's updated here on what his ADP is looking like. So he's going in the 8th round. He's a second-year player. Was drafted in the 1st round out of Alabama. A lot of hype, for PPR leagues as being this high volume guy. Like, he had a pretty disappointing season last year. You could say as a rookie, his numbers weren't bad. We've seen worse rookie years for sure. But we've also, in recent years, seen a lot of these players make seamless transitions to the NFL. 52 catches, 856 yards for Jeudy, only 3 touchdowns. The quarterback situation has not gotten any better, really. You have Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock. I don't see how Jerry Jeudy catches touchdowns this year. As simple as that. And, on the other hand, I could see him being a guy that catches 75 balls for close to 1,000 yards. And, in the 8th round, 8th, 9th round, wherever it is, you could talk me into thinking like he might be a good player for our bench strategy. Add him to the bench as a player that might pop, might make a big second leap, especially if their quarterback situation breaks in the right direction. But as of right now, I'm more off on Jeudy, but he is a big prospect entering his 2nd season. So I do want to keep an open mind on him, especially given the lower AEP.
This would probably be one of the ones that we probably disagree the most on. I have Jeudy probably up in like the 7 range. And we've talked about some things where I kind of target him in potential dynasty stuff. You've never really been a huge fan of him. I liked him coming out of college. I think his rookie season is good. I mean, tell me how many other rookies catch 52 balls when their quarterback situation is what it is. Drew Lock played 13 games last year, so he missed a few games. He also had a 57 passing completion percentage. So does Drew Lock improve on that? That's going to be, I think, to me, the number one question. Josh Allen was able to. So can they figure out how to get Drew Lock to get up to 65%? I mean, Jerry Jeudy had 113 targets. 113 targets last year at 16.5 catch reception per average. Like, those are huge numbers. He just needs to get a little bit better catch percentage, and his numbers will dramatically increase. And that doesn't even account for the fact of him just taking other leaps in terms of being consistent, more snaps on the field, etc. But he played all 16 games. He caught over 50 balls. Jerry Jeudy's the type of person where they can make that second-year leap, and they're going at such a discount that they can dramatically outproduce their draft capital. And those types of players always super intrigue me. Like, worst case scenario, maybe he does a little bit of what he did last year and he's a little bit inconsistent. They're just inefficient offense, which is very possible if Drew Lock's still there. I don't know if Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater, who might be more accurate, would be better for him. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater did a good job getting the ball to DJ Moore. So I don't know who would actually be better. I think that Jerry Jeudy has the possibility of completely outproducing his draft capital, and those are the types of players that can really, really bolster your team if you hit on the top end of the draft, and then all of a sudden now you have Jerry Jeudy who's performing as a top 24 wide receiver, but you drafted him wherever he's going. So that's the reason why I'm intrigued in Jeudy a lot.
Yep. Okay. Who's next on your list?
My next one is someone that I haven't had for a couple years, kind of like your description of Joe Mixon, but just keeps on producing much more so than Joe Mixon. Going in a range that's probably reasonable, but always seems unattractive. His name's Allen Robinson. 150-plus targets the last 2 years, 100 catches. It seems to be, the de facto number one receiver there. Just when you think he can't do it, he does it again with another quarterback, which has been basically his mantra since Jacksonville. I don't know, again, who's going to be better for that offense. I know that Justin Fields will be starting a lot earlier than most people probably think, probably even day one, in my opinion. So is that good for him or bad for him? I have no idea. Can he get another 150 targets? I've got no idea. I'm so indifferent on Allen Robinson. I don't have many thoughts. Where are you? So I almost had him on my list, actually, because I think he's going to be one of those players where he's going in drafts.
I think it's gonna be a little bit rich for my blood, for better, for worse, for right or for wrong. But I am higher on him because whenever I look back and look at his numbers, I mean, 4 out of the last 6 seasons, basically whenever he plays 16 games, he has over 150 targets. He just collects targets like, people collect, football cards or whatever. The guy just collects targets. We've seen back-to-back seasons too with just terrible quarterback play where he's produced, basically 100 catches, over 1,000 yards, 6 or more touchdowns. So we've seen him do it back-to-back years with terrible quarterback play. Matt Nagy seems like he knows what he's doing with Allen Robinson, and even if it's Justin Fields or Andy Dalton, I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be fine. There's just nobody else to throw to. I think he's going to have a high target share percentage in this year. So, but the reason I almost had him on my list is because it's just going to really come down to, what's his ADP again as of right now? 3rd round, right? So you have Allen Robinson coming in at 310. I think that's really fair. If he's early 3rd round, I could see me just never getting him. If he falls into the 4th round, I could see me having him multiple shares of him. I think he's one of those players where it's just going to be a game of inches, and when we get into the draft, because I do like him, but like Terry McLaurin's going right there, Chris Carson's going right there. 2 other players that I love. Mike Evans is going around later. There's just so many players in that range that I like a lot. I mean, it's like wide receiver central when you go 3rd, 4th round. So I think because of that, I could see myself not having a lot of shares, if any, of him, but I still like him as a player.
Okay, who's next on your list?
All right, I got I'll go J.K. Dobbins. I got 2 more. We'll go J.K. Dobbins. I know we've talked about him a few episodes ago. And I think he's a good example of, like, part of the reason I have him on this list is I just feel like it's too pricey given what we saw from him. And I get it. It's running backs. There's a big drop off, and you need to start running backs. There's very few of them, but he's on an offense where, they're going to spread the rock around. They're going to ride the hot hand. And, just like with Gibson to a lesser extent, but definitely with Cam Akers, we just didn't see like a ton of production from J.K. Dobbins on, given the fact that it was such a run-heavy team last year, such a run-heavy offense, in a year when Mark Ingram did absolutely nothing, and we saw him still have under 1,000 yards, under 20 catches. I don't know. I see the upside if he gets the touches, if he can be somebody that they give over 200 carries to, and he can make incremental leaps in the passing game and just be a little bit more involved. I think he could definitely pay dividends in the 3rd round and give you a pretty good ROI at that point. But I could also see him just like being kind of what he was last year, which means if you draft in the 3rd round, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, to me, he is a 3rd round trap written all over him. Me and you went over, which we should do this as in another exercise, another episode, because I don't have it pulled up and it'll take too much time. But the 3rd and 4th round running backs year over year, because they all get pushed up, is like trap central. It's got a name like a Josh Jacobs or like a J.K. Dobbins, and which ones are you going to believe in? And unlike Josh Jacobs, J.K. Dobbins really is not getting the ball, unfortunately. They still have Gus Edwards. They still have Justice Hill. They all received touches last year. J.K. Dobbins never had more than 15 touches in any single game last year. And it's just, and Mark Ingram really wasn't utilized last year either. So there's no room for like reallocating Mark Ingram's touches. That's the other crazy part when you look at that. So Baltimore is who they are. Their number 1 running back is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson also steals touchdowns near the goal line, which is another issue for running backs like him. There's no one that liked J.K. Dobbins coming out of Ohio State more than me. I loved him. But unfortunately, his landing spot is poor. He's being poorly utilized. I think he could catch the ball more, but Lamar Jackson isn't really the type of quarterback, unlike Phillip Rivers, to actually throw the ball to running backs. So there's a lot of things that are headwinds in terms of J.K. Dobbins having a breakout season, and I think this has 3rd round trap written all over it. I got him down to like a 2 on my scale of like.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I could see where you're kind of conflicted in terms of, hey, obviously with the team and the running, there's all this upside, but there's also a lot of these red flags where I imagine a lot of people, will be a little bit in the unknown realm. All right, let me jump to my next person. Rookie. Here's a rookie. And he's a running back, and I'm undecided. We don't have any notes to go off of him, right? But I feel like maybe he's not going to get the credit he deserves because the production from James Robinson last year. This is going to be an interesting play on the change of ADP. But Travis Etienne, is he just going to kind of sit there for a little too long? I'd be very curious, especially if you're doing early drafts. I think even the better for him. But Travis Etienne, we're going to love that offense, right?
Yeah.
How much work is James Robinson really going to steal from him? How much work can he really, go out there? And he's not a great pass protector, which we know is a huge issue in the NFL. So there's definitely going to be red flags, but I'm super intrigued. I don't know how much I want to push him in terms of, on the pod and I like him and go draft him versus does he need to fall in my lap? I'm like a straight 5 here.
Same. Yeah, I think he's a player at that point in 6th, 7th round, maybe the late 5th, probably 6th or 7th round where
if it's 6 or 7, to me that's an easy yes because of the upside.
But you'll have to probably make a decision. Do you want to go with a player like a T. Higgins or I don't know, like a Cortland Sutton or somebody else that will start for you, or do you want to add a luxury item to your bench that has a lot of upside? And it's going to depend on the flow of the draft, what your roster construction is looking like. But I agree. We don't know what that split is going to look like. We don't know if he's going to take over James Robinson. Will it be 50-50? Will it be 60-40? But he's got a lot of upside, and they draft him in the first round for a reason. So
let me tell you where I think he will likely end up going by the time we finish end of August.
Where?
4th round. I feel like anytime you have a first round running back, they're never going below the 4th round. And when they do, it's usually a pretty decent deal. Because the draft capital's there. They're stepping in day one in some type of role. I think that's where he ends up. And maybe this is a little bit of my bullishness to him, but I'm also factoring that into my, uncertainty. Like I think he's going to get a little bit of more love as we get closer. And there's just a lot of uncertainty there, but I think I like the upside at the same time. I need to dive a little bit deeper into this.
100%. Yeah. I mean, this is an example. Like a lot of these receivers, I think the ADPs are what they are. Maybe they move up or down a few spots, but ETN, as more information comes out, as training camp starts and preseason, like we could see some big moves in what probably not going back any further, but he could definitely creep up. And James Robinson's at 4.05. You could definitely see him close the gap there. My last player is, and I think you're going to like him a lot. My last player is CeeDee Lamb. More so, now I like CeeDee Lamb too. So he had a much better season than not much better, but he had a considerably better season than Jerry Jeudy. 74 catches, 935 yards, 5 touchdowns. But he's in a great offense that will get Dak Prescott back. He's got Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper. I think they can support probably at least 2 of them to a high extent, and I think Lamb being the second. But I think the reason that I have Lamb on this list isn't that I wonder if I like him or not. I do like him. I just don't know if I want to pay up for him. I don't know if I want to spend the draft capital, and right now his ADP is 4.07, which at first glance doesn't sound bad, but when you look at some receivers that are going beneath him, you have Chris Godwin, you have Cooper Kupp, you have Kenny Golladay going in, as well as Deontay Johnson and Tyler Lockett, those 3 going a full round later. To me, I would rather have Deontay Johnson, I would rather have Lockett probably, and I would rather have Godwin. I would rather have Lamb than Thielen at this point. Kupp, it's very close, but my point is there's so many players that are going, receivers specifically, that are going behind him that I like probably a little bit more. So if I was in that situation on the clock, I don't know what I'd do with CeeDee Lamb because he's on a great offense and he certainly has the upside. I loved him. He was my favorite receiver coming out of college that year. And he went behind Jeudy and Ruggs. So I thought, people were sleeping on him. I thought the Cowboys got a great deal with him. So I don't know. I have him on my list. I put him at about a 6.
Yeah, so I definitely like him. I had him as my burst out player, whatever that title was that we did for the episode. The player that can make a big leap. I think that he obviously has all of those characteristics written all over him going to the second year, full season of hopefully Dak Prescott. I don't know what the numbers were, but I had those projections put out in that episode. The funny part is that the only difference between Judy's and Lamb's season is basically efficiency. I mean, Judy had 2 more targets than Lamb, but 20 less catches. Which you're going to say, well, that's the whole point. That's why they have Dak. So I'm like, I get it. But you see where I'm going with the whole Judy upside? If they can get just slightly more efficient on the same targets, he can have his own big season. And Judy also had 4 more yards per catch than Judy, which is an enormous amount, by the way. So I like Lamb a lot. I agree that the value might be a little bit rich for my blood. He reminds me of that season after Antonio Brown left Pittsburgh, and Juju was just sitting there in one of these spots where it was like this third, fourth round, after all the heavy running backs went, and you saw potential number 1 upside in Juju, and I was banging the table for him. This was like 2 seasons ago, and it didn't work as well as I would have hoped. But this is kind of reminds me of a similar scenario right here, where he had a good season, and could he even take it to the next level? That's a great question. I like him a lot, but it will definitely come down to valuation and price.
All right, who's your last player?
So my last player is a very interesting one. Probably clearly the most boring out of all of our players. Sometimes when you get this late in the draft, you go, well, anyone is worth a flyer or taking. But I'm also undecided in terms of sometimes we really like a lot of late round players, and we want to kind of put our name on it and put our stamp of approval on these players.
Can I guess who it is?
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. Is it a rookie?
No. It's a player who's been around for a while. Quite some time, and he's on a team that has a really undesirable team. It's going to have a horrendously bad season, and a quarterback that is we don't even know who the quarterback is yet. Do you? Is that any guesses there?
Oof. No, I can't.
But he's produced. Almost,
throws me off.
He's produced almost every single season, including last year. It's Brandon Cooks. Now, obviously, the quarterback situation sounds horrendous. I'm just wondering if he's still going to put up good numbers. Is it an Allen Robinson situation where he's going to be good enough? He's going to have such high target share percentage. I mean, just such high target share percentage. He's still catching the ball at over 14 yards per catch last year, had over 81 catches. Now, he had Deshaun Watson, so I get it. But his numbers were also uber efficient, had 119 targets, 81 catches. I think where he's going, there is so much built-in negativity into this draft. I wonder if we're going to get a free flex player. Or a free, top wide receiver 36, for no money, for nothing. Is this a type of player that you could put $1 in your back pocket in your auction drafts and get him and be like, okay, yep. I guess, because he's going to go so late, he's going to get forgotten about him. He's not sexy, but I almost can bet that he's going to produce numbers.
Has there ever been a receiver in NFL history that's had 1,000 or more yards for 4 different teams?
Yeah, and
he's not even 30. He's 27. It's kind of crazy. I don't mind it. I don't mind it. I think at that, obviously, no matter what, it'll be okay value where you're going to get him. I just think that you gotta subtract a decent amount just by not having Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson, one of the best fantasy quarterbacks. Who knows who his quarterback is going to be? I think you gotta knock him down a few pegs. And at that
I've never been a big Watson fan, so this will be.
No, I know. Yeah, but in terms of throwing the ball and for receivers that catch passes from Watson, as a quarterback, say what you will about Watson, it's a plus for the if you want a receiver in Deshaun Watson offense, that's a good thing. I just think you're gonna be able to replace him very, very easily in free agency throughout the course of the season. Because he could easily fall to the 60 catch range, 900 yards. Touchdowns, he's going to be hard to come by. He could get 2 or 3 touchdowns. So I think you can easily replace him. but I think that's a perfect player for our bench strategy. For one of the like higher floor, lower upside guys that you need. That will at least serve that purpose.
Yeah, again, like when you go this late, as I mentioned, it gets real unsexy, and you can make an argument for anyone. But when I was going through the list, he kind of caught my eye. I'm like, here's a player that I'm not too sure about, and I need to do a little bit more research on it because maybe he's just such a great value pick at almost free that give me those 60 catches with my last pick for free because I don't know if there's anywhere else I can get it. I need to do some more research. This is the whole point of having this episode and this topic, but I was intrigued when I came across his name.
Yep, it's definitely a good one.
All right, any parting thoughts, Seth?
No, I think there aren't too many players that we don't have an opinion on, but I think it's good to make a list of these players, and I encourage everybody out there to do the same because you want to have an opinion on every single player if possible by draft day, so you're prepared for every situation. So come up with your own list, and then just like dig into the stats, and just really look at these players and to try and form an opinion on them. Because once draft day rolls around, you might be in a situation where they're on the board, and then maybe they're worth taking. Or
Brandon Cooks is going for $1, and it's going once, going twice, 3, 2, and if you hadn't done your research, you might just kind of just let that slip right by you. I mean, I don't know how many times a wide receiver falls into that range where it's like, I didn't really love him going into this draft, but geez, if I would have known he was going for $5 or $1, I might have thought a little different. So, great point there. That's going to wrap up our episode on players we are unsure, undecided about, and we'll have more of an opinion as we get closer to the draft. Thanks everyone for listening. We are the NFL Talking Heads.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast Show. Try saying that 3 times fast. With your hosts, Jeff Carrier and Seth Lowe. We'll catch you next time.